Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It seems like everywhere you turn these days, someone's talking about those drone sightings over in New Jersey.
Yeah, they've really captured people's imaginations, haven't they?
For sure, and for good reason. I mean, the reports we're seeing, they're pretty strange. Definitely not your run-of-the-mill drone stuff. So we're going to do a deep dive today into a podcast episode all about this.
Oh, yeah, I listened to that one too. Drones over New Jersey. A growing mystery in the sky.
That's the one.
Yeah.
We figured a deep dive into the deep dive was in order. We got to try and get to the bottom of this. We're talking large formations of these things, weird flight patterns, often at night.
Uh,
It's wild. So what do you think? Are we on the verge of uncovering some massive government secret, or are we all just losing our minds a little bit?
well, I don't know about losing our minds, but it is fascinating how this whole thing has blown up. I mean, think about it. Just a few weeks ago, this was just a handful of reports, and now it seems like the entire state is buzzing, no pun intended, about these drones.
Yeah, the speed at which this has spread is definitely a little unnerving. So let's back up a bit and start with the basics. When did these sightings actually begin, and where exactly are they happening?
Okay, so the first reports started trickling in towards the end of November 2024, mostly from folks in Morris County.
Morris County.
Okay, specifically around towns like Morristown and Parsippany Troy Hills. And what's interesting is a lot of these early reports mention seeing drones in pretty unusual places, like hovering low near tree lines or along highways, not places you'd usually expect to see drone activity.
Right, it's not like someone's just flying their new toy around in the park.
Exactly. And then it seems things escalated pretty quickly from there.
How so?
Sightings started popping up in other counties, first in Warren County, around Phillipsburg and Washington, and that's when the descriptions start to get really interesting. Residents reported hearing strange buzzing noises at night. And even creepier, there were police reports of drones flying in formations, what they were describing as military-style formations.
Okay, military-style formations. What does that even mean when we're talking about drones? What would make a drone formation distinctly military?
That's a good question. It's not something you hear every day right now. Witnesses were describing really tight, precise formations, sometimes involving dozens of drones moving in perfect sync with each other. They seem to maintain these specific patterns and distances, much like, you might see in a military air show. And that's really different from the more, well, random movements you'd see with recreational drones.
Yeah, that's not your neighbor's kid messing around with a Christmas present.
Definitely not. This is clearly something much more organized and a lot more sophisticated.
Absolutely. So these aren't just some off-the-shelf drones. What kind of technology are we talking about here? What could even enable this level of coordinated movement, especially at night?
Yeah, that is the big question, isn't it? To pull off this kind of silent, synchronized flight, especially with large formations, you'd need pretty advanced tech. Potentially even stuff that's beyond what's publicly available right now. Think about it. Drones with advanced sensors, autonomous navigation capabilities, and maybe even some form of communication between the drones themselves to keep those formations so tight.
So not something you can just order online.
Definitely not. This is high-level stuff.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
So we've got large, virtually silent drones flying in complex formations, mainly at night. Honestly, it sounds like something straight out of a spy movie. I mean, is it possible we're looking at some sort of classified government project here?
I think it's definitely on the table. You've got to look at the locations. We know Hunterdon County, another spot where there have been a ton of sightings, is pretty close to a lot of critical infrastructure and major transportation routes. It wouldn't be crazy to think that a government agency might be testing out some new surveillance tech or maybe data collection technology in that area.
Right. And what about those reports of drones flying in grid patterns over huge stretches of land? Some witnesses in Sussex County near places like Newton and Branchville have described seeing 20 to 30 drones all moving in perfect unison. I mean, that level of coordination almost seems impossible.
It does, doesn't it? Makes you wonder what we're really dealing with here in terms of technological advancement. We're talking highly sophisticated autonomous drones that are capable of some kind of complex swarming behavior? Or is there like a central control system somewhere directing these formations from afar? And get this, the FAA hasn't confirmed any authorized flight plans in these areas. Just adds another layer to the mystery, doesn't it?
It really does. So, okay, we've got this government angle, but is it possible this could be something else entirely? What about a private company? Could this be some kind of experiment they're running?
Oh, for sure. That's definitely a possibility. I mean, the private sector is pouring money into drone tech right now, and we're seeing crazy advancements in areas like package delivery, infrastructure inspection, even stuff like large-scale data collection for environmental monitoring. So it's not out of the question that a company might be testing the limits of what drones can do, maybe pushing the boundaries with autonomous flight and swarm technology, things like that.
That makes sense, but if it was a private company, wouldn't they want to keep it under wraps? Protect their intellectual property, I mean. Why risk all these public sightings?
That's a great point. Maybe they just didn't anticipate how much attention these flights would get, Or maybe, just maybe, they're operating under some kind of special permit that lets them test in these areas without having to disclose what they're doing.
Hmm, interesting. Okay, so we've got government agencies, we've got private companies, but with all this talk of military-style formations,
Mhm.
it's no surprise that some folks are starting to lean toward some more, shall we say, out there theories. We got to address the elephant in the room, the UFO connection. You've seen those theories popping up online, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely. It's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, with descriptions like that, people are going to connect those drone sightings to something extraterrestrial, especially with all the talk about UFOs and unexplained phenomena lately. It's understandable, but I do think it's important to approach these theories with, let's say, a healthy amount of skepticism.
So we're not ruling out aliens, but we're also not jumping to conclusions.
Exactly. Extraordinary claims, right. They need extraordinary evidence. And while it's fun to speculate, let our imaginations run wild a little bit, we really need to stick to verifiable data and logical explanations. Although, having said that, the government has released some interesting information recently about, unexplained aerial phenomena. It does make you wonder.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so it's a balancing act, keeping an open mind while also not getting carried away with speculation. So we've got government agencies, private companies, and maybe even something beyond our current understanding as potential players in this drone mystery. What do you think is the most compelling piece of this puzzle? What really stands out to you?
I think for me, it's the sheer scale and complexity of what we're seeing here. We're not talking about a couple of drones buzzing around. It's dozens of them potentially flying autonomously in these precise formations, often at night, covering vast distances. It's mind blowing. This level of sophistication, it just points to a really deliberate, well funded operation, whether it's coming from the government, the private sector, or, well, who knows?
You're right, the scale of it is just mind-boggling. And it makes you wonder, if this is such a coordinated, sophisticated effort, why all the secrecy? Why not just come out and tell people what they're doing? Put everyone's minds at ease a little.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? That lack of transparency is one of the most perplexing parts of this whole thing.
And of course, that's what fuels all the speculation and conspiracy theories. People are naturally curious, and when there's no explanation, we tend to fill in the blanks ourselves, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the more mysterious those drone sightings become, the wilder our imaginations run.
That's for sure. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, but it feels like we're just scratching the surface of this drone mystery.
Yeah, we've laid out some of the key players and some possible motives, but there's still so much we just don't know. Like they say, the truth is out there somewhere. It really is. Feels like every time we turn around, another piece of the puzzle pops up. But I think one of the most interesting aspects of this whole thing, one thing we haven't talked about much, is how quiet these drones are. Witnesses consistently describe them as being almost eerily silent.
You're right. I hadn't really thought about that. Most drones, even the larger ones, they make at least a little bit of noise, some kind of hum or whine, right? So what could explain that? Why are these things so quiet?
Well, it makes you think, doesn't it? It suggests a propulsion system or maybe some kind of noise dampening technology that's way more advanced than anything we see in commercial drones. I mean, it's possible they're using some kind of electric propulsion system that has, I don't know, advanced noise reduction features. Or maybe they're using a totally different type of propulsion tech
It's
altogether.
something completely new. We haven't even thought of it yet. Okay, that's kind of cool, but also a little freaky.
It is, isn't it? Because then you start to think, who's developing this technology and what are they using it for? If they were just testing out new drone capabilities, you'd think they'd do it somewhere more controlled,
Yeah.
away from people. But these things are operating in a way that suggests they don't want to be seen. They're flying at night, near sensitive locations, that sort of thing.
So you're saying the silence itself, it could be a tactical decision,
Hmm.
not just a technological byproduct.
Uh,
Okay, yeah, that adds a whole other layer to this whole thing.
right. If you're trying to avoid detection, staying silent would be a top priority. And that leads us to the big question. Why so secretive? What are we trying to hide?
All right, so let's play devil's advocate for a second here. Maybe the silence is just a side effect of being more efficient. Like maybe this advanced propulsion system, maybe it just happens to be more energy efficient and as a result it's quieter. Are we maybe overthinking things a bit?
Well, it's possible, I guess, but think about it. The pattern of behavior, the night flights, the formations, being close to those sensitive locations. I mean, it all kind of points to, an effort to remain undetected. It's hard to ignore that.
You've got a point. It seems like every time we think we're getting close to an answer, we just end up with more questions.
Hmm.
But I guess that's what makes this so fascinating, right? It's a real-life mystery playing out in real time, and everyone listening is right there with us, trying to figure it all out.
And speaking of everyone listening, let's think about what this means for, the average person in New Jersey. If these drones really are doing some sort of surveillance, what does that mean for privacy, for civil liberties?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? It's like something out of a sci-fi movie. The government watching our every move. Are these drone sightings a sign that we're headed down that path?
It's not an unreasonable thing to think about. The tech to do that kind of widespread surveillance using drones, it's already out there. And if these drones are as advanced as they seem, who knows? Maybe they've got facial recognition or thermal imaging cameras, all sorts of sensors that could gather incredibly detailed information about people.
Okay, that's a little creepy, not gonna lie. But we can't just focus on the bad, right? There are potential benefits to this technology as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, drones are being used for good things all the time. Search and rescue, infrastructure inspection, environmental monitoring. They can be used to assess damage after natural disasters, keep an eye on wildlife populations, even deliver medical supplies to remote areas. There's no question that there's a lot of good that can be done.
So I guess it's all about finding the right balance, making sure the tech is used responsibly and ethically, right?
Exactly. We need to talk about the risks and the benefits. We need to have these conversations out in the open and, set clear guidelines and regulations to make sure this kind of tech isn't misused.
That makes a lot of sense. We can't just ignore these advancements, but we can't let them, infringe on our freedoms either. It's a tough spot to be in.
It really is, and we need to be paying attention. We need to be informed, engaged, asking questions, demanding transparency, and holding those in power accountable. We all have a part to play.
I agree. It's on all of us. Okay, well, let's get back to this mystery. We've talked about government agencies, private companies, even the possibility of, well, something we can't explain. But is there one theory that you think is the most likely explanation?
It's hard to say for sure. Each theory has some things going for it and some things that make you wonder. But I think it's important to keep in mind that this might be something entirely new, something that doesn't fit neatly into those categories we keep talking about.
So you're saying there might be something else out there, something we haven't even considered. That's pretty intriguing.
It is, isn't it? We tend to see the world through the lens of what we already know. But what if these drone sightings are telling us that, what we know isn't enough? What if we're seeing a technological leap that we just don't have the framework to understand yet?
It's like those early astronomers trying to make sense of the stars, before telescopes. They could see things moving around up there, but they didn't have the tools to really understand what they were looking at. Maybe we're in a similar situation now.
I think that's a great analogy. We're seeing the effects, but we're still missing that underlying cause. And that uncertainty, it's exciting, but it can be a little unsettling too.
No kidding. Keeps you on your toes. But speaking of the things we're seeing, a lot of the witness accounts mention the formations these drones fly in.
Yeah.
Earlier, we talked about them being described as military style. But what does that actually look like? What are we talking about in practical terms?
It's more than just flying in a straight line. People are describing wedges, V-shapes, even more complex patterns, like stacked diamonds or echelon formations. And those aren't random. Those are tactical formations, the kind that maximize visibility, maneuverability. They're designed for specific purposes. Military pilots use them all the time.
Okay, so if these really are part of some kind of military operation, those formations would make sense. But what if they're not? Could a private company or somebody else have a reason to use those kinds of formations?
It's less likely, but not impossible, I guess. I mean, there are situations where a company might need to coordinate a bunch of drones. Maybe they're mapping a big area or doing an inspection of some infrastructure or something like that. But yeah, the fact that these formations are so close to what you'd see in the military, it does make you think about the possibility of the government being involved.
Okay, let's say for a minute that these drones are part of some government program. What kind of program are we talking about? What could justify that level of secrecy and the technology we're seeing? What are they doing up there?
Well, there are a lot of possibilities. We know the government's been pouring money into drones for both surveillance and for combat. So maybe they're testing out brand new types of drones with, crazy new capabilities, maybe autonomous swarming tactics, stealth technology, or even directed energy weapons.
Hold on, directed energy weapons. Are we talking like lasers and stuff? That sounds like science fiction.
I know it sounds wild, but they're real. Directed energy weapons are something the military is definitely researching and developing. Think about focused beams of energy, lasers, microwaves, stuff like that to take down targets. And drones would be the perfect platform for that, right? Maneuverable, high altitude.
Okay, now you're freaking me out a little. Are you saying these drones could be armed? Like they could be dangerous?
I'm not saying that for sure, but it's something we can't rule out. We just don't know what these drones are capable of. They're keeping everything so quiet. But when you see them flying in those military formations, it does raise some concerns.
No kidding. And what about the ethical side of all this?
Hmm.
If the government's testing weapons like that, shouldn't we know about it? Don't we have a right to know what's flying around up there?
Of course we do. Transparency and accountability, those are crucial, especially when you're talking about military tech, stuff that could actually hurt people. But the government, they love to keep things under wraps. National security, they call it. But all that secrecy, it breeds fear and distrust. It's a slippery slope.
It's a tough one. We need to be able to trust our government to protect us.
Right.
But we also need to hold them accountable, make sure they're not crossing any lines.
That's the key, isn't it? Finding that balance. And this is a conversation we need to have as a society about military tech.
Hmm.
What level of secrecy is acceptable? What are the risks? What are the benefits? And who gets to decide how this technology is developed and used? These are questions for all of us.
Absolutely. Big questions. And they go way beyond these drone sightings in New Jersey. This is something that affects all of us.
It does. And it's something we need to be talking about. The future of warfare, the future of society, it's being shaped by these technological advances right now. We need to be aware, we need to be engaged, we need to be part of shaping that future, not just letting it happen to us.
Well said. Okay, so we've explored a lot of potential explanations, government testing, private companies, maybe even something truly extraordinary. But it seems like, in the end, we're left with more questions than answers.
That's true, but that's also part of what makes this whole thing so fascinating, this mystery. It reminds us that we're living in a world where the line between science fiction and reality, it's getting blurrier every day. And that's pretty exciting and maybe a little bit scary.
It definitely is. But it reminds us that we need to stay curious, keep asking questions, never stop exploring the unknown.
And maybe, keep an eye on the sky. You never know what you might see.
It really makes you wonder what we'll be talking about this time next year, what new mysteries will pop up. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's try to wrap up what we've learned today. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Government conspiracies, cutting-edge tech, even a possible glimpse into some sci-fi future. So where do we go from here? What are the big takeaways?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that we're at a turning point. Technology is moving so fast, and those drone sightings, they're a perfect example. I mean, stuff that used to be pure science fiction, it's becoming our reality. And that brings up a whole bunch of questions about what we want that future to look like. What kind of world do we want to live in?
Yeah, it's like we're on the verge of something huge, something we don't fully understand yet,
Yeah,
which is exciting but also kind of scary, right?
exactly. The decisions we make now, the conversations we're having, the rules we put in place, all of that will shape the world for, I don't know, maybe generations to come. It's not something we can just ignore and hope for the best.
So what can our listeners do? I mean, it can feel pretty overwhelming, like it's all happening to us.
Yeah.
What can we actually do to be a part of this?
It starts with being aware. We need to understand what's being developed and what it all means. What are the implications? Once we're informed, we can start talking about it, asking questions, making sure our elected officials and the companies making this stuff, are being transparent. We can support organizations that are working to make sure these technologies are being used ethically for good and not, for bad.
Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
The more we know, the better we can understand and maybe have a say in how things unfold.
100%. But it's not just about knowledge, it's about action. We have to be a part of this. We can't just sit back and watch.
So speak up, make your voices heard, hold those in power accountable. It sounds like you're calling for a new kind of activism. Tech activism? I don't know.
Yeah, something like that. We need to fight for responsible tech. Make sure it benefits everyone, not just a select few.
That's a great point. But just to bring it back to those drone sightings, if someone listening happens to see one, what should they do? What's the best course of action?
First, don't freak out. They haven't been reported as dangerous, haven't hurt anyone, but definitely document what you see, the time, the place, how many drones, any details that stand out. Take pictures or video if you can, but be safe. And report it to your local police and the FAA. More information means we can get a clearer picture of what's going on, right?
And of course, tell us about it too. We're always interested in what you're seeing, hearing, thinking. It all adds to the bigger picture.
Every little bit helps. You never know what tiny detail could crack the case wide open, right?
You never know.
Yeah.
So as we wrap things up here, is there one thing you want our listeners to remember? What's the message you want them to take away?
Stay curious. The world is full of mysteries, and those drones, they're just one example. Ask questions, challenge what you think you know, keep exploring. It's a lifelong journey, learning and discovering, and you'll be amazed at what you find.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for being with us on this deep dive. I know I learned a lot today. And everyone listening, keep your eyes on the skies, keep your minds open, and stay engaged. We'll catch you next time, folks.